Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
We met in an interesting environment, and we've talked about this journey, and that this is something I've recently started, but I'm really intrigued to hear yours. So I'm excited that you're here today to kind of, for me to put my listening ears on and take it in, because I think that from what it sounds like, you have some knowledge that you could bestow upon, and however you may view that. I look at things as learning part of the most, how should I say it? The most valuable part about learning is being able to pass it on, right? And like tell it, because from the beginning of time, storytelling was how we learned everything. There was no necessarily written word. So we met during contrast therapy. Mm-hmm. That wasn't your first time doing that, right? I think it was my.
It was my first time doing it with. It was my first time doing it. I've done each of those things, but never together.
Okay.
And never with Sam.
Got it. I think it was my second weekend trying it. My favorite part about the whole thing, and the thing that I want to really get into more, is the breath work. Mm-hmm. I think that was I've done cold stuff. I've done hot stuff. I think that breath work was something I've never really focused on before. But you have an interesting perspective on all this, because you also, not wear many hats, but you wear a hat and a yarmulke, right?
I do.
So you have a couple different things, and I thought that was really interesting that an individual would be into these different modalities. How does that tie into your religion, or how is that part?
So I have a really kind of bizarre journey. So I became a rabbi later in life,
okay.
And I had a whole career before I ever became a rabbi for many years.
Okay.
So I started, I grew up in New York. I was born in New York City. Grew up mostly in Connecticut. I played sports all through high school and college. Most of my college education actually was paid for because I played football.
Oh.
And I did my undergraduate work at a small Division III school in Hartford, Connecticut called Trinity College.
Okay. May I ask what position you played in football before?
Yeah, I played offensive center.
Okay.
But I was also about 250 pounds back then.
Nice.
So that's about 50 pounds heavier than it's about 60 pounds heavier than I am now.
Yeah.
And then I went out into the business world after college, and I had a number of different jobs. My first job out of college, I actually worked for one of the largest ladies' lingerie companies in the country. I was the Warner's bra man. I sold bras, panties, slips, camisoles, the whole bit.
Wow.
To department stores, to trade all over. I had a number of different territories. I had sort of a very interesting position where they would put me into a territory that somebody else had kind of messed up.
Okay.
I'd get the revenue up to a certain point. Then they would put somebody else in there to keep that revenue, and I would go somewhere else and do the same thing. And I did that for 5 years. I moved every year for 5 years.
So you were like saving accounts and acquisitions, and then somebody would come in for the retention part?
Yeah, basically, yeah. So I would call on for one of my territories, I had all of Kansas and 3/4 of Missouri. So I lived in Kansas City, and I had all the major trade in Kansas City, and I had all kinds of lingerie stores in Salina, Kansas, Hayes, Kansas, Dodge City, Kansas. I went down into the Ozarks. I'd go to Cape Girardeau, Columbia, Jeff City, all of that. I had all of Missouri except for St. Louis. We had a person who specifically was in St. Louis. Yeah.
I find that so interesting, because that's one of those industries where you really don't, well, at least I should say I don't, think about all the back end things that go on, and
right.
That you think it kind of appears or happens.
Yeah. And I actually, when I trained for that job, so that was my first real job out of college.
Okay.
And when I trained for that job, you had to go to fitting school. You had to become a certified bra fitter. So
okay.
So I'm actually a certified bra fitter, and actually not long ago.
That might be kind of interesting for a young man.
Yeah, right. Well, and back then it was 85% of our sales force was men. There were very, most of the back then, it was a long time ago. So there weren't as many women in the workforce as there are today.
Sure.
And so a lot, but most of our designers back then were men. So it was kind of an interesting deal.
Yeah.
And not long ago, when I moved to Springfield, because I moved there like 4 years ago.
Illinois, right?
Yeah, Springfield, Illinois. I found the picture of my training class that I trained with when I got certified as a bra fitter. But then I did that for 5 years, and it was a great job, great company. But during the leverage buyouts, the company got bought, and all the people I was really close with, including the CEO, were kind of out. And at the same time, I was offered an opportunity to then help start an entire division for Aetna Life and Casualty, insurance company in the employee benefits area. So I did that. I was like the third person hired into that.
Was that from a
division.
random connection that you'd already had, or because it sounds kind of a different?
So I was living
far different career field.
I was living in Indianapolis at the time, but I had tons of friends in the insurance business, including my college roommate, my brother, because I went to college in Hartford, Connecticut. That's the insurance capital of the world.
Yeah,
so like Aetna, Cigna, Travelers, the Hartford, all those corporate headquarters are in Hartford.
Those are all underwriters.
Those are all major insurance companies. Yeah, they're all Fortune 50 companies. And so so a friend of mine called me and said, hey, I was living in Indianapolis at the time. A friend of mine called me and said, hey, we are looking to start a new division, and there's an opening in Indianapolis. Would you be interested? And I was like, I probably wouldn't have done it, except that, again, all the people I knew, including the CEO of Warner's, had left in the leverage buyout. They all got pushed out. And so I said, sure, I'll talk to them. So anyway, I ended up going to work for Aetna, and I helped start an entire division there. I was like I was literally like the third person hired into this division. And 3 years later, that division was like over 3,000 people and super successful.
Wow.
And I had a super successful career there. I was always one of the highest producing people there, and I sat on the Aetna advisory board, and so I had a very flourishing career. And then I actually took over and started an operation for the Chubb Group, another Fortune 50 insurance company, huge insurance company out of New Jersey, and I ran I started an operation in Indianapolis, and I ran that operation. And then I had, the crash and burn from alcohol and drugs, and plummeted my career, and basically lost everything.
So were you a functioning addict at that time, basically?
I was a functioning addict and alcoholic for quite a few years, until the very end when it all came crashing down.
Yeah.
And when it all came crashing down, I went literally from running the state of Indiana for one of the largest companies in the world, almost like overnight, to losing everything, and ended up in a homeless shelter. And I ended up in a homeless shelter in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I went to 3 inpatient treatments and 1 outpatient treatment in the span of about a year. Did my last inpatient treatment in Center City, Minnesota, and then I ended up in a homeless shelter in Minneapolis. And I lived in the homeless shelter for like 10 months. And I had no money. I had nothing, like zero. I'd lost everything.
So you went from a high earner, 6 figures.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Overnight.
Yeah. Yeah. Back in the middle 80s, I was probably making a couple $100,000 a year. And, I'm talking about 1985, 1986, 87.
Yeah, so that's like 600 now.
Yeah. Be a lot more now. And so I ended up in the homeless shelter, and the agreement was I got my room and my board, and as long as I agreed to work 38 hours a week for a not-for-profit that owned the homeless shelter called the House of Charity, and for $1 an hour. And I lived on $38 a week. And so we owned a food center.
What's the significance of 38 rather than 40? Because then they would have to pay benefits?
I think just $1 an hour, and you work 38 hours a week. It was just like $1 an hour, and you work 38 hours a week. And
this seems like an oddly specific time.
I don't know that there was any significance to that, except that it was a 38-hour work week. So we owned a food center that served about 4,000 hot meals a week to the homeless.
Okay.
And we also owned a housing shelter that housed about a little over 100 homeless people a night. So I worked in both the food center and the shelter, and lived there for 10 months, and had a really crazy experience there. Like when I got there, I got a roommate. So I'm living in a tiny little room. The room I lived in was probably about half the size of this room, and there were just 2 single beds and a sink and a window.
Okay.
And so I got there.
Not too unlike a prison cell.
Right. And my roommate was a guy named Mario, and Mario was a Colombian guy who turns out to be, he was a Colombian drug cartel guy. and he was in the homeless shelter doing the same work I was doing, but he was there while he was awaiting trial. And his lawyer thought it would be a good idea for him to do like volunteer kind of work while he was awaiting trial, like it would look good for his trial. And he was a major drug smuggler, like a major cartel guy, cocaine smuggler. And so I lived with Mario for a couple of months. He had a couple of more months before he had to go to trial. Now, our beds were about this far apart because it was just this tiny little room with 2 single beds in it.
Yeah.
And after living with him for a couple of months, Mario wakes me up literally at 3 in the morning in the middle of the night, and he's like, "Hey, Art, get up. I got to talk to someone." I'm like, "Mario, it's 3 in the morning. What do you got to talk about?" He goes, "No, seriously, get up." So I sit up on the side of my bed, and he sits up on the side of his bed. Our beds are so close, we can't even sit facing each other because our knees would hit, you know?
Yeah.
And so we had to sit like with our knees next to each other. Yeah, it's like we had to sit with our knees next to each other. It's so crazy. And Mario proceeds to tell me, he says, "You know how everyone thinks I'm going to trial for drug smuggling?" And I said, "Yeah, we kind of know your story." And he's like, "Well, that's one of the charges, but the primary charge is murder." It turns out that Mario stabbed a guy to death, stabbed a guy 20 times in a drug deal that went bad. And he was going to trial for murder. That was the primary charge.
You certainly never hear about 20 stabbings when a drug deal goes good.
Yeah, right. And you know, like you start to think, like now all of a sudden this guy just told me he stabbed the guy 20 times. That's like not.
And you're
it's
this
not
close
like,
to him.
Yeah, right. It's not like shooting someone at 50 yards. You know, like that's like up close, personal, violent, rageful. And so I don't even know, you know, like what do you say to a guy when he tells you he stabbed somebody 20 times? I'm like, you know, yeah, all right. Want to play a game of chess? I don't know. What do you, you know, like what do you even say?
Yeah.
So so I was freaked out. Like I mean, now I had to live with this guy. I mean, here I am. I'm like this Jewish kid from Connecticut, like, you know, like living with this murderer. So after a couple months, Mario went to trial. He didn't stab me. He went to trial, and he ended up getting 19 years in maximum security federal prison at Stillwater, Minnesota. And so the day he left for trial was the last time I ever saw him. That was
He's out now.
He must be out now. But he actually, not only did he get 19 years, he got 19 years with a letter of deportation. So when he got out, he was immediately deported back to Colombia.
Well, that doesn't mean anything in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
He'll be back.
Yeah, who knows, right?
He's
That's
back.
true.
He's
That's true.
hanging out in Minnesota.
Yeah, that's true. So I spent 10 months in a homeless shelter. And then when I got out, you know, I just like started putting my life back together. I was really, really fortunate. I became really successful again.
Was there a first step or was there a breaking point when you're like, enough's enough?
You know, after he told me that he was a murderer, I remember rolling over in my bed and thinking to myself, man, what am I doing? Like, I got to make some changes in my life because, like, I'm living in a homeless shelter. I don't have anything. I'm literally making $1 an hour, living on $38 a week. Like, something's got to be different. So I really, you know, I really got into recovery and AA and went to tons of AA meetings and got sober and you know, made a lot of changes in my life. And so, you know, I think that that most people in recovery get to a point where they just say, you know what, like, I'm going to do it different. And I think a lot of people, whether you're in recovery or not, there are a number of people who get to that point where they make a decision they're going to do something different. Like something's got to give, and I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to do it different. And you hear, if you listen to motivational speakers, this guy named Jim Rohn, who's probably one of maybe the best motivational speaker ever. He's passed away now, but I listen to a lot of his stuff. I listen to a lot of motivational stuff, and I counsel people today.
Talk behind a podium, or often talk behind a podium.
Yeah, yeah.
He's white hair guy.
Yep, he's fabulous. Yeah,
I just recently started. He's started popping up on my algorithm because I've been kind of doing this journey for 4 months now, and my social media is starting to learn what I'm into, right? But one of the things I find interesting before we move on to the next part of your story is like, because my thing was the baby steps, the consistency and discipline over time have allowed other things to fall in place without really me noticing.
Right.
And I've been documenting this journey because you always see, like, I'm talking to you here today because you've been on this. You've done these things and you've had this life experience. But I've never seen someone say, I'm at rock bottom. I'm going to climb out and I'm going to do it with you every day. Here's how I'm going to do it. And so that's kind of what I've been trying to do. And I would say certainly not rock bottom in the broad scheme of things, right? Like I have internet. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm not at rock bottom. But I was at the lowest point depression-wise that I had been. And so my thing was I started doing regular things every day.
Right.
Was your progression out of homeless shelter to success again, was there baby steps? Was there mantras that you used? Were there things that, like, what was that first part of that process?
So I was really fortunate to have like great mentors along the way and great sponsors.
Okay.
And so like one of the first things I did was I met a guy in the rooms of AA, and he got me sort of involved with a number of people who were sober and were doing really positive things with their lives. And he had a thing called the 10 daily actions. And it was the 10 things that you had to do every day. And so I started there. And you're right, it is all about consistency. Like if you listen to, there's a great book written by a guy named Darren Hardy called The Compound Effect.
Okay.
And it's all about just doing the little disciplines every single day. Jim Rohn talks about that.
I already like that because I haven't heard these things, but that's what I've been saying lately is the excitement that I find daily of my compound happiness is what makes me want to do it again the next day.
Right.
Because now I've got to the point where like, man, if I feel this good, and I still have struggles, I'm not different than I was 5 months ago at my core. I've made some improvements, but some of the things fallen into place because I'm excited about the compound happiness.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, if I can feel this good after 50 days, how good can I feel after 300?
Absolutely. And you know, like The Compound Effect is one book that talks about that. Jim Rohn talks about discipline, how important discipline is. Brian Tracy. These are all authors who wrote, like Brian Tracy wrote a book called $1 Million Habits. There's also a great book. I was very fortunate to have mentors who really coached me in having a very solid morning routine every day. So I, to this day still, and I started it a long time ago, have a series of things that I do first thing in the morning. Like I get up very, very early. I work out every day. I do some, I talk to God. I have a whole, routine of talking to God. And then I've gone through periods where I'll read stuff in the morning. Like I actually, as a rabbi now, I study Talmud first thing in the morning, but that's a whole other deal. And so I have a whole morning routine. So it's very important to have those disciplines if you're going to be successful. And if you read biographies of successful people or you hear them talk, they all talk about having a very solid morning routine. There's actually a book that was written by a different guy, a guy named Hal Elrod, called The Miracle Morning. And it's a fabulous book on that. Like I could have written that book long before Hal Elrod. Unfortunately, he did it and has made a fortune doing it. But everything he talks about in that book I've been doing for a long time. But it's a great reinforcement. And I've really been able to even step up my game even more after reading that book years ago. And I still to this day have it on my Audible account, listen to it. The same thing with all of these books. I listen to them continuously because we learn through spaced repetition. So you have to listen to things over and over and over again before they become part of you, so like really part of your being.
That's the reason why I have attended church more. Keeps my moral compass.
Yeah.
And I've been doing the same thing, repetitive.
Yeah.
Because you don't know, but one of the things until you always know, you always have to remind yourself. I talk to myself out loud a lot. But so my day is pretty much 5 to 5:30 a.m. to 7:30 a.m. I'm doing those same things. And one thing I recently added, because I had been reading about it, and I was like, I'm going to try this, is I have 15 minutes of worry time. And this may be something in one of those books, because I certainly didn't make it up. But I give myself 15 minutes to worry. So before my prayers, I do my self-reflection, then I do my worrying, then I do my prayers, and then on the way to the gym, I'm listening to Bible in a Year right now on audiobook. And on the way home, I listen to self-affirmation, and I also fall asleep to self-affirmation. Yeah. And I repeat it. So as I'm falling asleep, it's like, I am worthy. I can finish things. I can do this. I can do that. And I repeat it to myself until I fall asleep. Yeah. And all this stuff used to seem so hokey to me and so jokey, and I was so easy to dismiss it or whatever. Right. And it was because the demon inside, the trauma inside, call whatever you want, was uncomfortable with it. And they wanted to joke about it, and they wanted to deflect it because that kept me anchored in my old self. Right. And I've been trying to kill my old self for like 40 years.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally get it, and I believe that. And I think that those practices are important. I also listen to, when I go to sleep at night, I put on, like a motivational, inspirational book on Audible, something that I read, and I listen to it while I fall asleep, and then it keeps playing, and we know that subliminally we absorb that stuff.
Yeah, a lot of
even though
osmosis
even though we're not conscious, our subconscious is absorbing that stuff while we're sleeping.
Yeah.
So I believe in all that stuff, and I actually counsel people in this area all the time. So so after I became successful again, I was really fortunate, and I decided I wanted to start going back to school. So I first went back because I was in the business world. At the time I went back to school, I was running. I helped Prudential start an entire division.
Okay.
And then I ran the whole central part of the country for Prudential. I think I had maybe 17 or 18 states that reported to me at that time. And I wanted to get my MBA. So I went back to school and I got my MBA.
So it's financial services.
Yeah, I was on the insurance
similar
side.
realm of, okay.
Yeah, I was on the group insurance side.
Do they have, was it life? Is it life?
Well, all group life and disability. What happened was I was hired as one of 4 directors whose charge was to sell off our healthcare division, medical, because the medical division was losing, quite honestly, about $400 million a year.
Okay.
And so we had to sell that off at least 2 years before we could go public. Prudential was a mutual insurance company when I went to work for them. We went public while I was there. And so we needed to get rid of that division because you can't go public if you have a $400 million albatross around your neck.
Got it.
So we were told by the investment bankers we need to get rid of that division. So we sold that division actually to Aetna, and then we started up an entire division for group life and disability, group life insurance and disability on its own. So we sold life and disability insurance to corporations for their employees.
Was gap insurance a thing yet at this time?
Well, it was. Yeah, that's a different
relatively
product.
new aspect of insurance.
Yeah,
isn't it?
in the last probably 30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason I say that is because when you mentioned health markets, at least here in the Midwest, and from a layman's term, certainly I'm not no knowledge in that field at all, but it seems like a very monopolized market. Like there's like 4 companies that you can get health insurance from.
Right. That's what it's become. It used to be when I started on in the health insurance side, when I helped Aetna start a whole division on the medical side, there were probably 35 to 40 companies selling health insurance.
Okay.
That's changed over the years.
Which is why the rates go,
and what happened was companies kind of cannibalized other companies, and then you had it. In order to become successful in order to remain successful in that market, you had to own networks, and it became much more complicated. And so you had fewer players in the market. Okay. So now you just have some big ones like Cigna, Anthem, United Healthcare.
But the underwriters are where the real money is in insurance, right? Like that's the big dogs, right?
Well, yeah, but those are the companies who are the underwriters. So so Cigna would be like they're the underwriter, and independent insurance agents would sell their product. Anthem is the same thing. Oh. Anthem owns like 17 or 18, maybe 18 Blue Cross organizations across the country now.
Okay. So is this like one of those things with a bottling place? I remember taking a tour of a local liquor bottling place. And it blew my mind, but I guess it's normal. There's big vat of vodka, but there was like 4 different labels that was being filled by this vodka.
Yeah.
So it's similar in that sense, where like these underwriters can have, they can distribute out their policies at different rates or different package deals to different agents.
Well, agents would sell the product. The product.
I don't even take it on a rabbit hole.
No. The product would be the same, and the price would be the same, no matter who the agent is. It's the agent's job to go get the customer, and then they come to the insurance company to do the underwriting of the policy. The insurance company becomes the risk taker, so the agent doesn't have any risk. The insurance company has the risk. The agent just gets a margin for what they sell. The agent's just a middle person who sells the product to the end user. Okay. So I wrote the dental insurance for the city of Chicago at one time. I shouldn't say that. I wrote the disability insurance for the city of Chicago at one time. So Standard Insurance Company was who I worked for. We were the risk taker. We had a consultant and an agent on that case who then, were the contact to the client. Okay. So. Yeah, so the agent and the broker become middle people, and the risk takers are the insurance companies, like the Cignas, Aetnas, Guardians, Prudentials, all those are the risk takers. So I did that. So when I was at Prudential, I went back. They paid for me to go back and get my MBA. So I got an MBA. Then I took a job. I was offered a job to go out to California to take over an operation for another very large insurance company called Guardian Life Insurance Company, and I took over the LA operation. While I was there,
Does that still exist, Guardian?
Oh yeah, huge insurance company. Yeah, Guardian's the largest, actually the largest writer of dental insurance in the country. Yeah, yeah, huge insurance company, Fortune 100, company. Does individual stuff as well as group stuff.
Okay.
So we sold, like in my division, we sold group life, disability, dental, a whole slew of products. We used to do health insurance, but that's for example, when I was at Guardian, we got out of the health business because it just became too complicated and we didn't want to play in that arena anymore. So I ran that operation. And while I was in California, I was over 10 years in recovery already. I was sober over 10 years. And I thought, I really want to go back to school again. I didn't know really what I wanted to go back to school for. And a friend of mine told me about a program that she had just graduated from, and it was to get a master's degree in spiritual psychology, which sounded really interesting to me, especially being in recovery. And she was in recovery. I knew her from the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I went and interviewed, and I thought, wow, this sounds really cool. So I went and got a master's degree in spiritual psychology.
Now, is the word spirituality used because it's all-encompassing, or it covers different types of theology, or how does that factor in?
Spiritual psychology would be, it's funny, a lot of people ask me this. Spiritual psychology would be where really the beginnings of psychology were spiritual psychology, and it takes it back to the beginnings. Right now, psychology is like all clinical, and it's all like every diagnosis is in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And spiritual psychology takes it back to the old days when it was all about intuition, connecting one-on-one with someone. Well,
where does that break? Because I look at things like in my mind, there's two major periods in psychology. And again, very layman. And the first one would be the philosophers, your Plato's, your Aristotle's, these guys. And then your second one would be like the Freudian era, where that would be more the clinical side of things, right? Like,
so spiritual psychology would take it back to the more talking one-on-one, where everything's not like a diagnosis that's in a manual.
So you're not taking it back time period wise. You're taking it back to the basics of.
Back to the very beginnings of psychology, really, back into the beginnings when it was all about one-on-one contact, talking. And what spiritual psychologists would believe is that everybody has all the answers they need inside them already, but sometimes they just need a little help in getting there.
Okay.
And spiritual psychology would be.
So we're born with this innate inability to heal ourselves the same way that our body heals itself.
Yeah.
But with the mind, maybe we need to unlearn things in order to learn things.
Yeah, and we sometimes just need guidance in getting to the answers. Yeah. Like we might need some guidance. So one of the things we know about spiritual psychology is if you're going to be a life coach, and there's a huge industry of burgeoning life coaches now, the perfect degree to have if you're going to be a life coach is a master's degree in spiritual psychology.
Okay.
And so a lot of my friends who I went to school with, a lot of them are life coaches now. And a lot of them do things like breath work that we talked about. A lot of them, are into other modalities as well, which would include breath work or contrast therapy and stuff like that. So, but spiritual psychology is really about just helping people find the answers that they already have inside of them, but just have trouble getting to. So once I got that side, so I did all this while I was at Guardian working a full-time career.
Remind me, I have a question about modalities when you're finished.
So once I had that, all this time running this operation for Guardian, working full-time, going to school full-time. Actually, all the degrees I have, I've had a full-time career while I actually went to school full-time too.
That's pretty unique in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like having two full-time jobs in a way. So then a couple of years after I got my degree in spiritual psychology, I wanted to go back to school again. So I thought, I have the spiritual side now. Let me get the more practical side. So I then went back and got a doctorate in psychology. Okay. So that's the more clinical side. So I actually have both sides of that coin. Now, were you able to get the
doctorate to go straight to, you didn't have to do the preliminary since you already had a degree? You could
Right,
go
I
to
already had a
doctorate?
master's degree
Okay.
in psychology, but it was,
Okay.
even though it was spiritual psychology, so I got into a doctoral program, and I got a doctorate in psychology as well.
Okay.
And then ever since I got my doctorate in psychology, even though I worked, again, a full-time job the whole time and all that, I've always had a private practice where basically I have a really holistic view where I really help people from all different angles, as opposed to somebody who has a degree in psychology doesn't necessarily have the spiritual side, so they really aren't, they can't approach it from as much of a holistic approach as I do.
It's like a mind, body, spirit
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, and helping people like.
Because if you're healing one without healing the others, it's only a matter of time before they all kind of catch up, right?
And so so therapists and psychologists would help people sort of look at the root causes of the past and how their past is influencing what they do today. I'm going to look at that to some extent, but I'm going to help people talk about what I want to talk about is here's where you are today.
Where you want to be.
Here's where you want to be. Let's figure out how to get you there.
Yeah.
Like I'm a very proactive therapist. I do a lot of cognitive type work, and I wrote my dissertation for my doctorate on cognitive behavioral therapy. So I have a strong background in that.
Is there a balance? Because one of the things that I've started changing over on my journey is I visit the past, but I kind of stay out of it. And so part of it is because I've done regular therapy before. I recently started working with a therapist who he specializes in inner child work, right? And because that's where a lot of I started identifying like, okay, here's a block of time I don't remember my childhood. Right before that was the only time in my life that I can remember being happy, safe, and secure fully. And then here's the point at 14 where I gave up. Here's my give up point.
Yep.
So that's where I stopped maturing emotionally completely. But after forgiving myself for some of that, still haven't forgiven myself for all of those things that aren't my fault, but I am working on. I've been really focused more on like where I want to be.
Yeah.
Is that dangerous to not go back and confront those things before moving forward?
You know, I don't think so. I think that I think there are some things that you want to talk about, but I think that and you can do that. But I think that looking at where a person is today, helping them set goals that they want to, where they want to go, and then being able to measure those goals down the road is the most effective way of helping people move forward.
Okay.
And I do think that, and I do spend time when I work with someone. If I detect that there are some root causes that they need to address from childhood or from earlier times, I will help them address those. However, I really want the focus to be on what are you going to do today to change your life moving forward. And then we set goals and measure them. So I'm a firm believer in goals. Like there's been tons of studies done that we know that people who actually, first of all, we know that like only about 3% of the adult population actually write down their goals on a consistent basis every year. We also know that of the 3% who write down their goals every year, those people will not only meet those goals, far exceed those goals, and typically if you measure the wealth of those 3% compared to the other 97%, those 3% in studies that have been done will actually have accumulated 10 times the amount of wealth as the other 90%.
100% within that 3%? Or is there variables?
No, that there's, if the 3% that write down their goals consistently, if you measure the accumulation of their wealth compared to the other 97%, they'll accumulate. I
wonder if it's about belief, because sometimes that part of my worrying time that I give myself is that I write down my worries. So I only had the 15 minutes a day to worry.
Yeah.
It was paralyzing sometimes when I would have my biggest issue was with relationships, and it was the same repetitive things over and over again. I was never violent. I was never there, but what I would do is I would self-destruct slowly and calmly enough to where I just became unattractive.
Yeah.
It was never like anything where overnight you're just like, oh, this isn't working. But it was something where almost every time I could feel that individual pull away slowly.
Right.
Because I was testing their love.
Yeah.
So my worry time is I write down my worries and what can I do today? What can I do this week? What can I do this month about it? And I check those things off, or I plan it for that day. If there's something I can do about it today, like, and make this phone call and get this parking ticket taken care of.
Right.
Right. Like, okay, I'll call them at 9 p.m. Or 9 a.m. and I'll do that. Having that here has helped, or having it on paper has helped me keep it out of here.
Of course.
And I'm moving towards it unknowingly at times now.
I have people write things down all the time because we know, first of all, from research we've done, and when I got my doctorate in psychology, we studied this. From research that's been done, there's been a ton of research in this area. We know that there's a powerfulness about taking something in your head, writing it down on a piece of paper with a pen, not typing it into your phone or in your computer, writing it down with a pen or a pencil and having it on paper that takes it out of your head, frees up space in your head for other things, for creative thoughts to come in, and gets it out of your head, puts it on paper, makes it more concrete, and then your conscious will deal with it in a much more efficient and effective way. It's an important thing.
Is there preciseness to it, or is there also benefit to like free writing? Because I know that in the past I've talked about or about just get home and just write something. Just write.
Absolutely. We did a lot of free-form writing when I got my master's in spiritual psychology. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefit to free-form writing. And I still have friends. I personally don't do that right now and haven't for a while, but I have a lot of friends who do that on a consistent basis. And there can be a real therapeutic value to just free-form writing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, we know that that's an important thing. So
is it that maybe it takes a conscious effort and thought about my goals to get it from here to here? Because if I just have an idea in my head, like, oh, I want to make my bed every morning, right? And that's not one of the things I've added to my list, by the way. I don't do that every day. But if I wanted to do that, if I wrote it down, sometimes I feel there's been a negative effect when I write things down, because if I don't accomplish that, it's in my face and I've failed. But I think there's cognitive action that takes place that doesn't take place with a thought if I have to think about, use, and do.
If it's on paper, though, and you just haven't done it, you haven't failed, because you haven't failed until you quit.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, that's a realistic thing. And the make your bed thing, it's interesting you say that, because so this is another book. There's a guy named Admiral William H. McRaven.
Yep.
Do you know him?
Yeah. Well, I don't know him.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So he wrote a book. Yeah. So okay, and he wrote a book called Make Your Bed.
Yeah.
He wrote a whole book on making your bed.
That's kind of
and how important that is.
There's a whole military lifestyle set after that.
Yeah.
My grandfather was big on shining his shoes and making his bed.
Right.
He always had shiny shoes on.
I never made my bed until I lived in the homeless shelter. When I lived in the homeless shelter, you had to. It was part of the deal. If you didn't make your bed, you got curfewed, and you had to be in the. You couldn't leave the homeless shelter on after 6 o'clock for a whole week.
Oh, okay.
So you had to be in at 6.
So you still do that to this day?
To this day, every day since I lived there, every single day, I make my bed.
I wonder if that is. You could probably clarify this. And again, I won't take any of this to the bank in the sense that hold you medically responsible for any advice, right? But one of the things that I've noticed is, oh man, I completely lost my train of thought. We're talking about making the bed.
Yeah, make your bed. One of the reasons why you don't.
Oh, it's because I feel like the comfortable chaos inside of me that's reluctant to let go of my past has a few anchors. And while they seem minuscule, they're very powerful. Smoking cigars was a big one for me to let go. I went way down on it. I ramped up right away after that relationship, and then I went down, and then I kind of ramped up again, and then I had some tough love from friends, and they were like, hey, come on. One of my buddies was like, I'm going to kick you in the chest next time you smell like smoke. I'm just going to kick you in the chest. And he's like, I'll do it. I'm like, I do. And I'm far too old to take that strife. But making the bed, I've gotten, one of the harder things to overcome too was not setting stuff down where it doesn't go, just doing it, finishing it, finish that task. But I wonder if that making the bed thing and some of the other things are is there such thing as anchors? Is there the old self trying to hold on? Because I feel like that one thing could help me unravel everything I've done, in the sense that get up in the morning kind of with that effort and start there. Is there anchors and chaos?
So I think what happens with people, especially addicts, is that
and I'm certainly an addict.
Addicts get comfortable living in the chaos. so they continue to live in the chaos because it's what they're comfortable with.
Because our habits that we created in there have become our lifestyle, and now that's who we are.
And even though they're unhealthy habits, they're hard to break, right?
Yeah.
And you can, there's a lot of books on habits, Atomic Habits, which is another great book, that talk all about that. However, like making your bed and keeping your room clean, doing all that is the cleaner. One of the things we know also that we've studied in psychology a lot is the cleaner your environment, the more organized your environment, the less chaos you have going on in your brain.
Yeah, yeah.
So we know that. So if you just keep making your bed every day, keep your room tidy. When I worked for Guardian or for other operations, when I had managers that worked for me or people that reported to me, I could tell what was going on in their personal life just by walking in their office.
No, if they were well kept or
yeah,
not.
If their office was chaotic, I knew they had chaos. If their offices were well organized and put together, I knew that they were pretty disciplined and had a pretty orderly life in general.
So that was actually unbeknownst to me, and I'm sure that I have heard similar things over the years, but hadn't registered. But that's how my journey started, was with cleanliness. So I'm sitting, just depressed as can be, day 14, whatever it was, roughly 2 weeks into this. And I'm looking around, and my son had gotten into something. I've probably told this story a dozen times now, but had gotten into something in the neighborhood, and one of the other parents followed him into my home. And it was cluttered. It was chaotic. And I remember thinking to myself that the reason that relationship and every other relationship in my life had ended was because this was cluttered, this was chaotic.
Yeah.
And so I was so embarrassed when that happened, and I was like, you know what, I'm not doing anything else, literally not doing anything else right now. And so I got up and I cleaned for like a half an hour until I felt like stopping.
Sure.
And the next day, around that same time period, I said, let's do another half hour, see how far I can get. So like 7 days in, I'm wiping down the windows, and I've got like a black handprint on the back of the paper towel because it's been so long since they had been done. And now to the point where my grout is clean.
Yeah.
And so the idea behind that brought me comfort was in the realization of why I started going to the gym, why I started getting closer to God, why I started learning things every day. Sure. I watched an entire video about how to start a t-shirt company. Never in my life will I start a t-shirt company. I have no intent, I have no desire, but it was something I didn't know, and so I watched it, right? And so so the idea behind that was that my home now is a place that I feel comfortable in, and I feel safe in, and anyone from the outside world could walk in and they would feel safe, and they would feel comforted because it's a clean space.
Yeah.
And so then I said, what if I apply that to my heart, my emotional well-being, my mind, my spirit through God, and that way I become a safe and comfortable place for a partner in the future that is deserving of my love, and I'm deserving of their love.
Sure. I think there's a correlation there as well. Yeah.
I never had any clue of that, how powerful any of that could be.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
But
no, I think that's all connected.
Yeah.
I think that's all connected. And you know, I feel like fortunate that I learned early on in recovery that in sobriety that, you know, like making my bed and keeping my room clean was a requirement, and I've carried that on ever since.
Well, then it became a habit.
Yeah, and it became absolutely after a period of time it became a habit, and I've carried it on ever since. But then so the interesting part, so after I get my doctorate in psychology, I'm still working at Guardian. I have a private practice. I worked at outpatient clinics, you know, outpatient drug and alcohol clinics. I did counseling there, as you know, under supervision there, and then I started a sober house in California that I owned for 8 years. I completely funded. I started and completely funded my own sober house, which housed anywhere at any time from, you know, 20 to 40 people. I had a great sober house for like 8 years.
We're just looking at substance abuse addicts in this environment at this time?
Drugs and alcohol. Okay. Yep, drugs and alcohol for the most part. And I was able to help a lot of people. That was fabulous, you know, to have I had a really good sober house, and it was never about making money, so I helped a lot of people who couldn't afford to go to a decent sober house in California, because sober houses there are really expensive. I did that, and then I decided I wanted to go back to school again, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to go back for. I had looked at going to law school a couple times, but I never wanted to be an attorney. Nothing against attorneys, but I just thought it'd be kind of fun to know the law. And while I was looking at law schools, literally, this is not a joke, it sounds crazy as I say it, but literally while I was looking at law schools and interviewing at law schools in LA, literally a voice came in my head and said, "Why don't you go be a rabbi?" And I thought, that sounds like the craziest idea ever. Because I was Jewish, but never religious.
Sure.
I mean, I was bar mitzvahed when I was 13. And I went to, I was like a 2-time-a-year Jew, like most people.
Like first communion
like
for
most
us.
Jews,
Like,
yeah.
It's kind of the part of the process. We don't necessarily.
I would go to temple on high holy days on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but that was it. And so when the voice came in my head and said, "Why don't you go be a rabbi?" I was like, holy smokes. So because I have a master's degree in spiritual psychology, I know that I need to listen to some of those voices. And so that night, when I would do my normal nightly prayers, I just said to God, I'm like, God, like, if you think I should be a rabbi, like, you need to, like, literally put it up on a billboard with some flashing lights around it, because I personally think it sounds like the craziest idea ever.
That's great.
And over the next, 3 days, there were, all these signs, that very clear signs that I was supposed to go to be a rabbi. So I started interviewing at rabbinical schools, and lo and behold, I ended up going to rabbinical school and becoming a rabbi, an ordained rabbi.
I would have listened to that story differently 6 months ago.
That's probably true.
Because I wouldn't have. Mm-hmm. So it almost seems silly or petty for me to share mine, but I got to remember everything is relative, right?
Yeah.
Because your journey of voice in your head about what God's telling you to do, led you to a faith-based thing. Mine was this, what we're doing now.
Yeah.
So I was in my backyard and I had a cigar in my hand, mm-hmm. ready to light it up, and the sun, something for 3 or 4 days, kept telling me, add walking to what you're doing with your routine. Mm-hmm. Go for a walk. I've always connected really well with nature. Mm-hmm. Love nature. And so I was looking at this and I was getting ready, I was like, what? I had just recently read like a meme or something, right? That was like, you can't continue to pray for what you want to save your life if you continue to do the things that kill you. And I'm like, while I'm looking at this thing, I'm reading this. And so I'm like, okay, so I set this down and I get in my car because walking around the neighborhood didn't seem enough to me. And on a different occasion when we have more time, I'll tell you about my first time getting on my knees to pray again, which was kind of a strange experience. But so I'm like, okay, so I get in my car, I go to Walker Lake to do my walk. It's right up at Kirkwood Aquatic Center. And I'm walking, and for the first time in a very long time, as I was walking around this path, I was praying with my hands open. Mm-hmm. I was praying with my hands open. And I'm one of the guys that like looks around me at church and I'm like, put your hands down. I don't know why I feel that, but I think it was because, again, that's that part of me that's like, no, don't fully commit to this. So I'm walking, I'm doing this, and I said, God, I've never really asked you for a sign outside of selfishness, right? Out of things that my all-knowing Father would really be like, okay, keep doing what you're doing. So I'm like, please give me a sign that I would unmistakably know is you, that I'm on the right path with this production thing. Mm-hmm. And man, I thought somebody threw something in my head, and I was under a tree, and as I looked up, a red-winged blackbird had come down.
Oh wow!
Pecked me dead center in my back of my head.
Wow!
Like as if it was sure. Nuts. I've been again never experienced a touch, and I was just like weeping and walking and like, wow, like thank you. And the snowball effect from that has been other various signs along the way where it's just like, you do this for a living, but you've also done this from your experience. Working out makes you stronger. Working on my faith has made me more faithful.
Absolutely.
And it's become clearer as, when people say I hear a voice or I was in touch, I'd be like, whatever, BS. But as I've gotten closer and stronger, I'm like,
sure.
That's not only plausible, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Faith is like anything else. It's like a muscle, right?
Yeah.
If you don't work on it, then it goes away and fades. And if you do, then it gets stronger, and deeper. And so that's been my experience.
And with spirituality, I don't necessarily think that people have to focus on that part if they're not ready to focus on that part of the God or whatever. I think it can be a universe thing, it can be a spiritual thing, right? Like if you're connected with what your purpose is, then your purpose connects with you and things are drawn into you.
Yeah. Well, and we know, there's an energy that connects us all in the universe. I mean, if you study quantum physics, that's very clear.
I've been reading a lot about Stoicism and manifestation lately.
Yeah, there you go, manifestation. So just like the book The Secret or the movie The Secret would talk about, we have the ability to manifest, things in our future. Mm-hmm. And so it's I think that all you need to do to belong to that energy is believe. And it doesn't matter, as a rabbi, it doesn't matter to me if you're Jewish or Catholic or Christian or you are Muslim or you practice Islam or anything. It's just a matter of that if you believe. And if you believe, you get to belong to that energy. And you can call it whatever you want. In spiritual psychology, we call it the spirit of the universe. That's what we call it in spiritual psychology. In Judaism, I call it God, right? In Christianity, you may call it Jesus, right? It doesn't matter what you refer to it as. It's just a matter of believing and having that
It's the center
connection.
point of something that connects everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you get connected into that power in the universe.
But I feel like I'm another center point of my own, right? Like, is that not a? I don't mean that to say it in a way that I feel omnipotent or in some way better than anybody else. It feels like there's this all being, or whatever this energy is, and then there's me, and then all this webs, because everybody has their own. Yeah. Right. So one of the, and I would love for you to come back again. I've really thoroughly enjoyed this, and one of the ways I like to wrap up is I like to share something with you that I feel I'm taken away from what you've bestowed upon me today, and then I like to ask you kind of on the spot, but I give you the time while I'm talking to think about it, is if you could leave one piece of wisdom to those listening or watching, what would that be? And so I think the one thing that I'm taking away today, because I'm hearing it differently, is that the consistency over time can create the pathway to success. And I've heard it a bunch of different ways, but to hear it from a perspective of, what was that book? Like There and Back Again? I think it was a J.R.R. Tolkien. It was like one of the Hobbit series, There and Back Again. It was a Hobbit's tale. It seems like you've been there and back again a couple times, right? At least. Yeah. And so it's pretty meaningful to hear someone like yourself say, hey, this is something that consistently helped improve my life over time. And also reassuring to be able to identify with someone who, in a short period of time, I've gained a great deal of respect for you from your journey and what you're able to accomplish, and just your vulnerability and telling your story. That is incredible for me. But it's cool to be able to look up to somebody and listen, because one of the things I had a hard time with my coachability and lack thereof was it was difficult for me to give others respect, because when I saw something I envied in individuals, it used to be an envious blockade. And so I wouldn't allow myself to learn from them because I wanted what they had, instead of understanding that learning from them was the only way to obtain what they have gotten. I just may be 30 years behind the mark on it, at the age of 40. So, but it started late, but better late than never. So I'm taking away that consistency over time truly does have an impact. Absolutely. And I appreciate you really setting an example of that and drawing that out for us today. Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I love the book, The Compound Effect. It's all about that. And it's great. It's a great book to listen to. For me, one of the things I would say to anybody who's listening is that the most important character trait to have if you want to have success, if a person wants to have success in their life, is consistent self-discipline. Because you can have the most talent in the world, you can be the most talented person in the world, but if you don't have consistent self-discipline, then you're never going to do the things you need to do to achieve. Yeah. Like you're just going to be another talented person who never did anything with their lives. And so consistent self-discipline is, to me, that is like the master key that unlocks everything else. And I think that's really the important thing. And I believe, and I've heard, I'm not the first person to say this, I've heard many motivational, inspirational speakers talk about this, that how you do one thing is how you do everything. And if you can't do the little things right, then you'll never do the big things right. Right. And so that comes through consistent self-discipline.
So to me, that would be, if I could leave anything with your listeners and the people who watch you, I would say you have to have consistent self-discipline.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so very much for sharing your time and sharing your story and your knowledge. And absolutely love to have you back again sometime.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great.